The contact came up through the storm before we had a name for it. A smear of warm bodies clustered under the ice shelf that the threat board painted, amber and then, half a second later, red. I was reading drive temperatures off the aft manifold when Ensign Pell said, "Chief, you want to look at this?" In the flat voice people use when they already know the answer is bad. I looked. 41 returns. 41 heat signatures moving in a line across the floor of a canyon we had been told was empty, and the line was not walking. It was hunting. You could see it in the spacing, the way the cluster bent around something small at its center, the way the fast ones swung wide on the flanks. I had been an ops chief on the Bellwether for 9 years, and I had never seen a formation that read so cleanly as a kill in progress without anybody firing a shot. "Hold us off the deck," Commander Reyes said from the well behind me. She did not raise her voice. She never did. "Orson, what am I looking at?" "Predators," I said, coordinated. The small return in the middle is the prey. I pulled the thermal tighter, and the small return resolved into something with the wrong proportions for an adult of anything. Too much head, limbs that hadn't grown into themselves. Correction, the prey is a juvenile. It's running. We were not supposed to be there. That is the first thing I have to put on the record, because everything after it grew out of that single fact. The Bellwether was a gunship, low-slung, blunt-nosed, built to drop through atmosphere and sit on a target until the target stopped being a problem. We were running a deep survey of a system the catalog called Center's Reach, 6 weeks out from any friendly hull, and the planet under us had been flagged as a no-contact world. Confirmed sapient life, pre-space flight, hands-off. Our orders were to map it from orbit and leave. We were in the atmosphere because a microfracture in the number 3 drive cowling had forced Reyes to bring us low and slow to keep the hull from shaking itself apart while I patched it, and the patch was where my hands had been when Pell called me. "We log it and we climb," the XO said. Lieutenant Commander Dash. He was right, by the book. No contact world, that's a planetary scale event down there, and we are not part of it. "I know what the book says," Reyes said. The juvenile fell. I watched it happen in thermal. The small returned stumbling and going down, and the canyon floor coming up to meet it, and the fast flankers closing the distance with a horrible economy of motion, and I think every person on that bridge made the same small sound at the same time. The sound a body makes when it has decided something before the mind has caught up. "It got up," Pell said. It had. It was up and moving again, slower now, dragging one limb, and the hunters had stopped closing. Not out of mercy, I understood a moment later, but because they did not need to. They had it. They were herding it now, walking it toward the canyon wall where it would have nowhere left to go. They had done this 1,000 times. You could read the patience in the formation. "When Chief," Reyes said, "time to repair the cowling. 40 minutes if I rush it, Commander. An hour to do it right. And if we climb now on the patch you've got, we'd make orbit. The cowling might tear off above 10,000 meters, might not." I turned in my seat to look at her. She was standing very still in the command well with her arms folded, looking at the thermal feed, and I had served under her long enough to know that the stillness was not calm. It was the opposite of calm. It was a woman doing arithmetic she did not want the answer to. "That juvenile has about 90 seconds, Pell said quietly. Nobody told her to say it. She just said it. The way you say a thing that is sitting in the room with everybody. I have replayed the next 4 seconds more times than I can count, and I want to be precise about them because afterward there were people, good people I respect, who said Reyes broke doctrine. That she invented a first contact that the service spent 2 centuries trying to avoid, that the whole catastrophe started with one captain's failure of discipline. They are wrong, but they are not stupid, and the reason they are wrong is small, and it lives in those 4 seconds, so I will give them to you exactly." Reyes looked at the thermal. She looked at me. She did not look at Dash, because she already knew what Dash would say, and she was not asking him. "Bring us down between the child and the wall," she said. "Orson, you've got your hour. Pell, full floods, full noise. Everybody is about to find out we're here." "Commander," Dash said, "this is a no-contact." "It stopped being a no-contact world the second I decided I'm not going to watch this," Reyes said, and her voice never rose, and that was the moment, though none of us knew it yet, that the galaxy started keeping a file on us. The Bellwether dropped. I want you to understand what that looked like from the canyon floor, because I have since heard it described from the other side, by the only witnesses who lived, and the gap between what we intended and what they saw is the entire story. We intended a gunship descending on its main lift drives to interpose 150 meters of armored hull between a wounded child and the things that wanted to eat it. That is a small, mean surgical thing. From below, through driven snow, under a sky that had never produced anything but weather, what came down was a black slab the size of a temple lit from beneath by 4 columns of blue fire, and it came down screaming. Pell gave them the floods and the noise. Every external lamp the Bellwether carried, and the hull resonators we used to shake debris off the plating, pitched up into a sound that I am told carried 40 kilometers across the ice. We did it to scatter the predators. We did not know that the species on that world had no flyers, no thunder bigger than an avalanche, no concept at all of a thing that descended from the sky on fire and bellowed. We did not know we were about to become a god. The hunters scattered. Of course they did. 40 meters of blue plasma wash will scatter anything with a nervous system. They broke and ran for the canyon mouth, fast and low, and in thermal I watched the kill formation come apart into 41 individual animals, remembering, all at once, that they were small. All except the juvenile. It did not run. It could not. The dragging limb had finally given out, and it was down on the ice directly under us, in the cone of our landing lights, a small four-limbed thing with a head too big for its body, and it had rolled onto its back and it was looking up. "Set us down," Ray said. "Orson, get on that cowling. Doc, get to the lock. Dash, you and 2 Marines with me." "Ma'am," Dash said. To his credit, the argument was over. He had made it, he had lost it, and now he was a soldier. Rules of engagement. Nobody fires unless I say so. Nobody touches the child unless it lets us. She was already moving toward the ladder. We are guests on this world. We're going to act like it. I did not go to the lock. I went to the cowling because that was my job and because a gunship that cannot climb is a coffin, and I knew, even then, with my head full of the small thing on its back in the snow, that whatever Reyes had just started, we were going to want to be able to leave. I climbed out onto the dorsal spine of the Bellwether in a hard suit with the snow coming sideways, and I started cutting away the failed patch, and over the suit channel I listened to first contact happen. "It's not moving," Doc Owenny said over the channel. "Reyes, it's not moving and it's bleeding from the leg, hind limb. The big tendon's torn. I can see it from here. Can you reach it without crowding it?" "I can try." "It's a kid, Commander. I don't care what species, that's a kid that just watched a wall come out of the sky. If I move fast, it'll panic. Then move slow." I had the cowling open by then and the storm was trying to peel me off the hull, and through the suit camera feed, I could see the underside lights and a single small figure crouched at the edge of the cone, and Doc Owenny walking toward it with both hands open and empty, and her helmet floods turned down to the lowest setting so she would not be a silhouette of fire. It is a strange thing to describe a doctor as brave. We use the word for people who run toward gunfire, but I have thought about it a great deal since, and I have decided that what Owenny did in that canyon was braver than any boarding action I ever ran, because she did it slowly, in full view, with nothing to hide behind, talking the whole time in a low voice to a creature that could not understand a word and might, for all she knew, take her hand off at the wrist. "Hey," she said. "Hey, little one, I know, that was loud. That was the loudest thing that's ever happened to you, and I'm sorry. I'm not going to hurt you. Look, empty hands. See?" The juvenile did not understand the words, but it understood the slowness. It understood the open hands. There is a grammar to gentleness that runs underneath language, that predates language, that any animal raised by anything that loved it will read, and the small creature on the ice read it. It stopped trying to drag itself backward. It lay still and let her come. "Easy," Owenny said. "Easy. I'm going to look at your leg. That's all. Just the leg." "Movement on the ridge," Pell cut in. "Doc, you've got eyes on you. East ridge, 200 meters, holding." "How many?" Reyes said. 3, no, 5. 5 and more coming up behind." "They stopped running, Commander. They're watching." That was the second thing none of us understood at the time, and it mattered more than the first. The hunters had not fled the planet. They had fled 40 meters and then turned around, and now they were lying along the canyon rim in the snow with their long heads down, watching a black slab of a ship sit on the ice while a soft pink creature in a white shell crept up to the prey they had spent half a day running down, and they were not charging, they were watching. We thought we had scattered animals. We had interrupted a culture. The Skarn, that was their name for themselves, we learned it later, the word means something close to those who finish. The Skarn were not animals. They were a pre-spaceflight sapient species with a civilization built top to bottom around the hunt. Their law, their faith, their kinship, all of it organized around the act of running prey to ground and the iron rule that what your pack brings down is yours. They had cities. They had a written history 4,000 years deep. And the single most important law in that history, the law beneath all the others, the one a Skarn would die before breaking, was this: you do not take another pack's kill. We did not know any of that. Owenny knelt down in the snow next to a dying child and put her hands on its torn leg in full view of 41 hunters who had just been robbed, and she committed, by every law those people had ever written, the one unforgivable crime. "The leg's bad, but it's not lethal," Owenny said. "She's lost blood. She's in shock. I need to get her inside, Commander, or the cold's going to do what the leg didn't." "She," Reyes said. "I think so. Doesn't matter. She needs to come inside." There was a silence on the channel. I had stopped working. I was lying on the dorsal spine of my own ship with a cutting torch in my hand, and I had stopped working because I understood, we all understood, in that silence, that bringing the child inside was a door we could not walk back through. You can land a ship on a no-contact world and call it an emergency. You can scatter some predators with your engines and call it an accident. But you cannot carry a member of a sapient species across your own threshold and ever again pretend you were just passing by. Bring her in, Reyes said. Commander Dash said one last time. He was not arguing anymore. He just needed it on the record, and I understood that too. I want it logged that advised against this, every step of it. It's logged, Win, Reyes said, and the use of his first name was the only softness I ever heard her allow him. It's all logged. I'm going to answer for all of it. Bring her in. A whinny brought her in. I climbed back to my work because the cowling would not fix itself and because I could not watch. But I heard it, the lock cycling, Doc calling for a warm line and plasma, the small wet sounds of a body that had given up keeping itself alive being convinced by strangers to keep going. And I heard, underneath all of it, on the open channel, the thing that has stayed with me longest, which was the child. Once she was warm, once the shaking stopped, once Aweni had her stabilized on the deck of our medical bay with a heat lamp over her and a line in her arm, she made a sound, not a cry. We had all braced for a cry. It was a low, three-note call, repeated, the same three notes over and over. And Pell ran it through the linguistics package. And the package returned nothing because there was nothing to compare it to, and it was Aweni, kneeling over her, who figured it out first. She's calling for her pack, Aweni said. Her voice cracked on it. That's a lost call. She's telling them where she is. And out on the east ridge, in the snow, 41 Skarn lifted their heads, and they heard it. They came down off the ridge in the dark. I had the cowling sealed by then, a rough weld, but a weld, enough to climb on, and I had come back inside half frozen and gone straight to the ops well, because if the hunters were going to do something, I wanted to be looking at the board when they did it. Pell had the external feeds up on the main display. The storm had thinned and the canyon floor was a field of blue-lit snow, and across it, in a loose crescent, the Skarn were walking toward the ship. I got my first clear look at them then, and I will tell you they were beautiful, and they were terrible. The way a thing built entirely for one purpose is always both. They moved on 4 limbs but could rise onto 2, and they were tall when they rose, taller than a man, long-bodied. The spine carried low and level like a thing made for speed. Their heads were narrow and forward set, all of it aimed, eyes that faced front the way a predator's eyes always do. They wore worked leather and bone and dark metal, armor, ornament, I could not tell which, and later learned it was both. That among the Skarn there was no difference. They carried long, hooked blades on their backs that they did not draw. 41, Pell said. All of them. They left nobody on the ridge. Weapons? Sidearms only, blades sheathed. They're not rushing us, Commander. They're approaching. Reyes came up out of the medical bay, wiping her hands. There was blood on the rag, the child's blood, dark and wrong-colored, and she folded the rag and put it in a pocket like she meant to keep it. Talk to me, Orson. They're 40 meters out and slowing. Center one's ahead of the rest. Bigger. Older, I think. The leather's worn smooth. I zoomed in. The lead Skarn had a long pale scar down one side of its skull, and it carried its head differently than the others, higher, and the others kept a constant distance off its flanks, deferring to it without being told. That's a leader. Pack leader, war leader, something. The rest are reading off it. Can we talk to them? No, Pell said. We've got no shared anything. Linguistics has a recording of 3 notes and a lost call. That's it. The lead Skarn stopped 20 meters from the bow. It rose up onto 2 legs, slowly, deliberately, making the movement large, the way Aweni had made her open hands large. And I understood with a small cold shock that we were not the only ones in this canyon who knew the grammar of gentleness. It raised one long forelimb, empty, claws spread and turned outward. Then it pointed with the other limb at the hull, at the medical bay, at the place where the child was. It knows where she is, Reyes said. It can probably smell her, Aweni said from the hatchway. She had come up too. Through the hull, I don't know, but they ran her for half a day. They know her blood. The lead Skarn lowered itself back to 4 limbs. Then it did something none of us expected. It crossed the last 20 meters at a walk, came right up under the bow where our cameras could barely angle down to catch it, and it laid down. Flat on the ice, head between its 4 limbs, the long body pressed to the ground, and one by one behind it, the other 40 did the same. 41 apex predators, the things that had been herding a child to her death an hour before, lay down in the snow in front of our gunship and pressed their faces to the ground. Nobody on the bridge spoke. Dash broke it. Is that submission? I don't think so, Aweni said slowly. I don't think that's a species that submits. Look at the leader. His head's down, but his eyes are up. He's watching the hull. That's not surrender. She was quiet a moment. That's mourning. She was right. We pieced the rest of it together over the days that followed, from gestures, from the linguistics package slowly building a vocabulary, from the long patient work of two peoples trying to understand each other across a gap nobody had ever crossed before. But Aweni had the shape of it that first night, lying on the ice in the snow. The Skarn had not been hunting that child for food. They had been hunting her because she was theirs. She was Pack. The torn tendon limb, the dragging gait, she had been born wrong, or hurt young, one of the limbs malformed, and she could not keep the running pace that was the whole of Skarn life. And among the Skarn, a youngling who cannot run is not abandoned. That is the part that took us longest to understand, because it ran against everything their hunt-shaped culture seemed to be. A youngling who cannot run is given the long chase. The whole pack runs her, gently, endlessly, for as long as it takes, to teach her body to run or to find the limit of what her body could do. And at the limit, when she could go no further, the pack would close, and it would be quick, and it would be done by her own kin and not by the cold or by some other pack's blade. To us, it looked like a kill. To them, it was the most sacred thing they did. They called it the finishing. It was how the Skarn loved a child who could not be saved. And we had landed a temple of fire in the middle of it and taken the child inside our walls. "Oh," Aweni said softly, when she finally understood. "Oh no, we didn't rescue her. By their law, we stole her death." The first night was the longest watch of my life, and I want to put it down properly, because the histories skip it, and the histories are wrong too. After the Skarn lay down in the snow and pressed their faces to the ice, they did not get up. They held that posture through the night, 41 of them, in a storm that would have killed an unprotected human in an hour, and they did not move and they did not leave. We sat inside a warm hull and watched them on thermal 41 signatures lying motionless in the cold, and there is a particular kind of fear that comes from being besieged by something that will not even rise to threaten you. A pack that charges, you understand. A pack that lies down in the snow for 9 hours, facing your hull, in weather that should kill it. That is a thing whose patience is a weapon, and we had no defense against it because we did not know what it wanted. "They're going to freeze," Pell said, somewhere around the 3rd hour. "They're just going to lie there and freeze." "They won't," Aweni said. She had not slept. She would not sleep for most of 9 days. "Look at the core temps. They're dropping their metabolism. They can do this. They're built to hold a position for as long as it takes. That's what the long chase is. Patience is the whole of them. They are telling us, in the only way they have, that they are not going anywhere and that they can outweight us." She rubbed her face. "And they can. We've got 9 days of stores. They've got the rest of their lives." That was the first thing the siege taught us, and it taught it without a word. That we had walked into the territory of a species whose central genius was patience, and that we could not win a waiting game against a people who had spent 4,000 years perfecting the art of not stopping. If this was going to end, it was not going to end with them giving up. It was going to end with us understanding them, or with blood, and Reyes had taken blood off the table on the first night. Around the 5th hour, the board gave us one more reading that none of us forgot. The Skarn lying in the snow were not all facing the bow. Pell pulled the thermal apart and showed us. 38 of them faced the ship, but 3 had turned outward, ranged along the flanks, facing the dark beyond the canyon, sentries. Even besieging us, even pressed face down in mourning, the pack had posted watch against the night, against other packs, against the cold, against whatever else moved out there. "They're guarding the morning," Aweni said quietly, "and I have never been able to forget the shape of it. A people so disciplined that even their grief kept a perimeter, even their surrender to sorrow did not lower the guard on their own kind. We had thought, that first night, that we were the dangerous thing in the canyon. The longer I watched those 3 turned-out signatures hold the dark, the less sure of that I became. So we tried to understand them, and on the 2nd day, we made our first real mistake, and I record it because we learned more from the mistake than from anything we did right." Pell, working the linguistics package, isolated the lost call, the child's 3 notes, and she did a reasonable, careful, catastrophic thing. She played it back. She broadcast the child's lost call out through the hull resonators, low, thinking it might be a gesture of good faith, a way of saying, "We hear her, she is alive, she is calling, and we are letting you hear it." The whole pack came up off the ice at once. 41 Skarn rose in a single motion, blades half-drawn, and the lead, Corrado, though we did not yet have his name, took 3 fast strides toward the bow before he checked himself, and the forward lean of all 41 bodies was the most dangerous thing I had felt since we landed. Reyes had her hand near the weapons board, and I had mine near it too, and for about 4 seconds the entire contact balanced on the edge of becoming a massacre. "Cut it," Reyes said. "Pell, cut it now. Pell, cut it." The pack held. Slowly, over a minute that lasted a year, the blades went back, the bodies settled, and Corrado backed away to his place in the line, and we sat there shaking. What did we just do? Dash said. It was Aweni who worked it out hours later, and it chilled all of us. We played a lost call, she said. A child's lost call. Broadcast from inside the thing that took her. To them, think about what that means to them. The call says, here I am lost, come find me, and it came from inside our hull. We told them, in their own deepest language, that the child was lost and calling for help from inside the belly of the Sky Temple. We didn't say she's alive and safe. We said she's in here and she's frightened and she wants you. We very nearly got every one of us killed by trying to be kind in a language we didn't understand. That is the thing about first contact that no binder can teach and no protocol can prevent. The danger is not the strange thing you cannot understand. The danger is the familiar thing you think you understand and do not. The gesture that means good faith on your world and means abomination on theirs. The kindness that lands as a threat, the open hand that held wrong, becomes a fist in the other party's grammar. We did not come close to disaster on the first night, when we knew we understood nothing and acted with care. We came close on the second day, when we thought we had found a word we shared and reached out with it, and the word turned in our hands. After that, we slowed down. We stopped trying to send messages, and we started instead to listen, to build the language Corrado's way, the patient way, the long chase way, one verified gesture at a time, never assuming a thing meant what it would mean at home. It took longer. It was the only thing that worked. And I have thought since that this too was something the Skarn learned about us, though it is subtler than the rest and does not appear on their wall, that we were a people who, having nearly killed everyone with our certainty, were willing to set the certainty down and start over at the speed of the slower party. Not many peoples will do that. Most would rather be right at speed than understood slowly. We chose, after the second day, to be understood slowly, and it is the reason any of us are alive to have been understood at all. We held in that canyon for 9 days. We could have left. The cowling held. I tested it on the third day, ran the drives up to a quarter and the weld sang, but it held, and Reyes could have lifted us to orbit any hour she chose and filed the whole thing as a contained incident and let the diplomats sort it out from a safe distance. She did not, she said, and I am quoting her log because I was in the well when she dictated it, that you do not start a relationship with a sapient species by running away from the first hard conversation. So we sat on the ice with 41 mourners outside our hull when we did the hardest thing a warship is built to do, which is nothing. The work of those 9 days was the work of language, and it was Aweni and Pell who did it, hunched over the linguistics package 20 hours a day, building a bridge gesture by gesture. The Skarn met them halfway. That was the first thing that surprised us. These were not a people who recoiled from the strange. They were curious the way hunters are curious, patient, watchful, willing to sit still for a long time to learn the shape of an unfamiliar thing. The lead Skarn, his name, as near as the package could render it, was Corrado, and the others called him by a word that meant something like first blade. Came to the bow every morning and waited, and every morning Aweni went out to him, alone on the ice with empty hands. I watched those meetings from the ops well, and I will tell you they frightened me more than any boarding action of my career, because Aweni had no hull and no weapon and no way to run, and the thing she walked toward could have ended her between 2 breaths. But she went. Every morning and every morning Corrado did not end her, and slowly the two of them built something. They built nouns first: ship, ice, sky, the hook blade, the open hand. They built the child's name. The Skarn called her Issa too, which meant we eventually understood the one who is being finished, a name and a sentence at once, the saddest construction I have ever heard a language make. And then on the 6th day, they built the question that the whole contact had been circling, and it nearly broke everything. Corrado pointed at the hull, at the child inside, and he made the gesture for finishing, a closing of the long clause, slow, deliberate, the most solemn thing in his vocabulary, and then he opened his empty hand toward the ship and he waited. He was asking for her back. He was asking us to give the child to him so he could finish what we had interrupted. He was asking, by the deepest law of his people, for the right to love her in the only way his world knew how. And Aweni, who had spent 6 days keeping that child alive, who had set the torn tendon, who had fed her by hand, who had learned the 3-note lost call and learned to answer it so the child would sleep. Aweni had to stand on the ice and tell an apex predator that we would not give her back. She did it without a weapon. I want that on the record too. She could have stepped back inside the hull and let our guns do the talking, and Corrado would have understood guns, and that would have been a different contact and a worse one. She did not. She stood her ground on the ice with empty hands, and she made the gesture for no. The Skarn went very still, all 41 of them. The stillness of predators is not like our stillness. It has a weight to it, a forward lean, a coiling. I had my hand on the weapons board, and Rhea saw me do it, and she said quietly, Take your hand off that, Chief. If this goes wrong, guns won't fix it. And if it goes right, guns will ruin it. So I took my hand off the board and I sat there with my heart going, and I watched Doc Awani hold the most dangerous silence of the contact with nothing but the set of her shoulders. And then she did the thing that I think actually mattered, the thing that I have come to believe was the real first contact, not the ship coming down, not the floods and the noise, not the gunship that scattered them, but this. She knelt down on the ice, slowly, in front of Corrado, and she made the scarn gesture for finishing, the slow closing of the claws. And then she pressed her closed hand to her own chest, over her heart, and held it there. And she shook her head, and she let him see her face do the thing our faces do when we are about to lose something we love. She was telling him, I understand what you are asking. I understand it is love, and I am refusing it anyway, and it is costing me, and I am doing it on purpose. That is a thing no animal can say. That is a thing you can only say if you have a self that can weigh its own grief against a stranger's law and choose, with open eyes, to carry the harder thing. Corrado watched a soft, unarmed alien kneel in the snow and grieve out loud in his own grammar for a refusal she was making on purpose, and something in the first blade of the finishing pack changed. I saw it happen. I did not understand it yet, but I saw it. His head came up. The forward lean went out of the 41 bodies behind him, and he made a sound low that the package could not translate, and he rose and he turned, and he led his pack back to the ridge to think. I have run ahead of myself. Let me go back, because the 9 days on the ice were not a single smooth slope from fear to peace, and the parts I skipped are the parts that show what the first sight of us actually did to that world. On the 4th day, before any of the breakthroughs, a second pack came over the eastern range. Pell saw them first, a new cluster of warm returns cresting the ridge 12 kilometers out, moving fast, the loose-strung formation of a pack on the run. I called it up on the board and counted 60, larger than Corrado's, and they were not coming to mourn. You could read intent in the way they moved, the same way you could read it the first night, and this intent was different. This was a pack that had heard, across 40 kilometers of ice, that a black temple of fire had come down out of the sky and taken a child, and they were coming to see whether the sky temple could be taken in turn.
Second pack, I said.
60, inbound, fast. This one's not lying down, Commander. Reyes came to the board. She watched the new cluster eat the distance for a long moment. Corrado see them? His people are up. They've turned to face the range. He sees them. What happened next told us more about the scarn than the whole rest of the contact, and it happened without us. Corrado's pack, the 41 who had been our mourners, our siege, our problem, came down off their ridge and put themselves between the incoming pack and our hull. They formed a line on the open ice, blades drawn now, and they faced their own kind. And when the second pack arrived, there was a confrontation in a language we could not hear, 60 against 38, and we sat inside our gunship and watched a people we had known for 4 days decide whether to fight each other over us. They're defending us, Dash said, and he could not keep the disbelief out of it. Why are they defending us? They're not, Awani said softly. She had the long lens on Corrado. Look at his posture. He's not protecting the ship, he's protecting the child. The other pack would take her and finish her by the old law. And Corrado's already decided, somewhere in there, that he's not going to let that happen. He doesn't have the words for it yet. He just knows he's standing in front of it. She was right. We learned later that the argument on the ice that day was the first time in 4,000 years that one scarn pack had refused another pack the right to finish a child, that Corrado had stood on the open ground and made the case, with his body and his drawn blade, that the child inside our hull was no longer a thing the old law could reach. He did not win the argument with words. He won it the way his people settled everything, by being willing to die on the spot for the position, and the second pack, after a long, terrible standoff, broke and went back over the range rather than fight a first blade who had clearly lost his mind in some new and dangerous way. But here is the thing I have never been able to shake. Corrado made that stand on the 4th day, before Awani knelt in the snow, before the gestures, before the open hand, before any of the moments people point to as the turning he had already turned. Something about us, about a ship that came down to interpose itself between a child and her death, about an unarmed soft creature creeping across the ice with empty hands. Something had already reached into the deepest law of his people and loosened it, 4 days before we understood it had. And he stood on the ice and held that loosening against 60 of his own kind because he could not yet explain it even to himself. That is what the first sight of humanity did. We did not conquer that world. We did not outgun it. We never fired a shot. We landed in the middle of the most sacred and terrible thing those people did, and by refusing quietly at cost, unarmed, to let it run its course, we gave one hard old hunter permission to imagine that strength might have another shape. and he carried that imagining out onto the ice against his own people before we had so much as built the word for no. The Board of Inquiry never put that in the record because it could not be quantified and it did not fit the question they were asking, which was whether doctrine had been broken. But I was on that ice, and I am telling you, the most important thing that happened in that canyon happened on the fourth day in a confrontation we could not hear between 38 Scarn and 60 over the meaning of a word none of them had yet been taught to say. The second pack came back. I should tell you that too. 3 weeks after we left, long after we were gone, a runner from the second pack came to Corrado's range under the open hand sign and asked to be shown the child who lived. We know this because the Scarn, once they had spaceflight, once the long, slow generations had passed, and they came up off their world and found us again, brought us their histories, and the histories are full of it. The day the Sky Temple came, the first blade who opened his hand, the child who could not run and lived anyway, and the slow turning, range by range, pack by pack, decade by decade, of a whole world's idea of what it owed its weakest children. They did not finish them anymore. That is the line in their history that they were proudest to show us. After the Sky Temple, they did not finish them anymore. The fifth day was the day I almost ruined everything, and I have never told that part to anyone outside the crew, so I will put it here. The child took a turn for the worse. The torn tendon was set, and the cold was beaten, but the leg went hot under Oweni's hands on the fifth morning, infection working up from the wound, and the child's three-note call thinned out to nothing, and she stopped eating. Oweni worked on her for 6 hours, and at the end of it she came into the ops well gray-faced and said the words no doctor wants to say, which were I'm losing her, and I don't know if I can stop it. And I am ashamed of this, and I am putting it down anyway because the easy version of me does not deserve to be the one that goes in the record. I said we should give the child back. I said it out loud in the well with Reyes standing there. I said if she's dying anyway, if we can't save her, then the only honest thing is to give her to Corrado and let him do the thing his people do. Let her die among her own kind by her own law instead of alone on our deck under our lamps, surrounded by strangers she can't understand. I said it because I thought it was mercy. I have since understood that it was fear wearing mercy's coat, that what I actually wanted was for the hard thing to be over, for the decision to be taken out of our hands, for someone else's law to spare us the work of grief. Reyes looked at me for a long moment, then she said no, that was all no. And I started to argue. I had reasons, good ones, the kind of reasons that sound like wisdom when you are tired and frightened, and she held up one hand and stopped me. Orson, we did not carry that child across our threshold to give her back the second it got hard. We carry her until she lives, or we carry her until she dies, but we carry her. That's what it means to have picked her up. You don't get to put a person down because the weight of them turned out to be real. She turned back to the board. Go help Oweni. Do something with your hands. The talking's done. I went and helped Oweni. We got the infection turned on the 6th day, barely, on the last of the broad-spectrum plasma in our stores, the same day Corrado made his gesture of asking on the ice, and the child lived. But I have carried Reyes's words for the rest of my life, longer than I carried anything off that world, because they were the thing I had failed to understand and she had not. The whole contact turned on a single principle, and it was not a principle about ships or guns or doctrine. It was that you do not put a person down because the weight of them turned out to be real. That is the thing the Scarn learned from us. It is the thing I learned too, late in the well, with my face hot and my own cowardice laid out in front of my captain. We were teaching it to an alien world, and I had not yet learned it myself. I have wondered since whether that is always how it goes. Whether the things a species teaches the galaxy are always the things it is still, itself, in the middle of failing to learn. We did not come to that world as a finished people who had mastered mercy and descended to bestow it. We came as a tired gunship crew 6 weeks from home, and one of us wanted to give a dying child back to make the grief stop, and the only reason we did not is that the woman in command had decided, somewhere, that the cost of carrying a person is non-negotiable, and she was not going to let her chief talk her out of it at hour 6 of a 6-hour fight. That is the humanity the Scarn saw, not perfect, not even sure of itself. A people arguing with itself on the deck of a gunship about whether the hard thing was worth it, and choosing, narrowly, against the voice of its own fear, to do the hard thing anyway. I think if we had been better than that, if we had been serene and certain and untroubled, it would not have reached Corrado at all. It was the visible struggle that reached him. It was watching a people fight themselves over a child and choose her every time, at cost. The Scarn understood struggle. They had built their whole civilization on the long chase, the run that does not stop. What they had never seen was a people that would run that chase for the keeping of a life instead of the finishing of it. On the 7th day, After the three Skarn broke into the lock and Lund lost the use of his arm and we gave the prisoners back, Corrado came to the bow alone in the last light and stood there a long time, and then he did something the package took us a full day to understand. He drew his hooked blade slowly in plain sight so we would not mistake it, and he laid it on the ice in front of the bow, and he stepped back from it, and he opened his empty hand. He was giving us his blade. The thing a Skarn first blade is, the thing his whole rank and self were built around, the tool of the finishing. He laid it down in the snow in front of the people who had taught him another way, and he stepped back from it, and he stood there with his hands empty. We did not take it. Oweni went out and knelt by the blade and did not touch it. She made the gesture for finishing, and then the gesture for no, and then she picked up the blade, carefully, with both hands, and she gave it back to him. She put it back in his hands and closed his claws around it. I asked her later why. We could have taken it. It would have been the safe thing, the dominant thing, to accept the surrender of the most dangerous individual on that ice. Because he didn't need to stop being what he is, she said. We weren't there to take the blade out of his world. We were there to show him it could open as well as close. A first blade who can't finish anymore isn't a Skarn who learned mercy. He's just a Skarn who's been disarmed. I wanted him to keep the blade and choose every single day not to use it the old way. That's the only kind of mercy that lasts. The kind you could break and don't. It did not get easier after that. I want to be honest. Because the easy version of this story, the one where a doctor's tears melt a predator's heart and everyone learns to love each other, is a lie, and the people who lived it deserve the truth. The Skarn went back to the ridge to think, and what they thought about for 2 days was whether they were going to take the child by force. We knew it. We could read it in the formations. The crescent on the ridge tightened and loosened, the way an argument looks from the outside, and we understood that Corrado was holding a line inside his own pack, and that not everyone behind him agreed. On the 7th night, 3 Skarn came down off the ridge without him, low and fast in the dark, and tried the rear lock. The Marines had it. There was no firing. Reyes had made that an absolute, and the Marines were disciplined enough to hold a melee with stun staves against 3 Apex predators in a corridor rather than break it, and it was the ugliest 2 minutes I have ever heard over a suit channel, the crash and grunt of bodies in a space too small, and at the end of it the 3 Skarn were down and bound, and 2 of my Marines were in the medical bay with Oweni, and one of them, Corporal Lund, had a forearm laid open to the bone. But nobody died. That was the whole victory. Nobody died, and it cost us a corporal's arm and very nearly more. And when Corrado came down at dawn and found 3 of his pack bound in our hold, he did not free them. He left them. He gestured when Oweni came out, a gesture the package had built by then. That meant something like wrong, blood, oath broken. He had told his pack to hold, and 3 of them had broken his word in the dark, and by Skarn law that put them outside the pack, and he left them in our hold as ours to do with as we chose. It was the first time we understood how serious he was. He had bound himself to whatever this was going to become, and he had cut loose anyone who would not bind themselves with him. We gave the 3 back. Reyes ordered it. She said, "You do not start a peace by keeping prisoners," and we opened the hold and let the 3 bound Skarn walk back to the ridge, and Corrado did not thank us and did not punish them. And that, Oweni said, was its own kind of answer, that there was now a thing between peoples that was bigger than the 3 who had broken it. On the 8th day, the child woke up enough to walk. She could not walk well. The torn tendon had been set, but it would never be a runner's leg. Oweni said she would always carry that gait, the dragging step that had marked her for the finishing in the first place. But she could stand, and she could cross the medical bay holding Oweni's hand. And on the 8th day she did, and she made her way to the forward viewport on her own, and looked out at the ridge where her pack was, and she made the 3-note lost call. And from the ridge, 41 voices answered her. I was in the well when she did it, and I had to look away from the board because my eyes had gone wrong. Pell was crying openly and not pretending not to. Even Dash, who had advised against every step of this, who had been right about the danger at every turn. Even Dash stood at the viewport with his hand on the glass. She wants to go to them, Oweni said. Commander, she's asking. She knows what they are and what they were going to do, and she's asking to go to them anyway. She's pack. We can keep her alive, but we can't make her ours. She's theirs. And if we send her out, Reyes said they finish her, maybe. Oweni's voice was steady, and it was the worst thing I ever heard. That steadiness because of what it cost her. Maybe. Or maybe something's changed out there. I don't know, Commander, but I know we don't get to decide for her. We never did. The second we decided we were going to treat them as people, we lost the right to treat her as a thing to be kept. That is the part the people who criticize Reyes never reckon with. They say she should never have intervened, that the clean choice was to climb and log it, and let the child die by her own people's law. And maybe the body count would have been lower if she had. But the choice in front of us on the 8th day was not whether to play God. It was whether, having already acted, we were going to keep acting like the child was a possession or start acting like she was a person with a people of her own. And there is only one of those that humanity can live with. Open the lock, Reyes said. Doc, take her out. We go with her, me, you, Orson. No weapons, no Marines. If they take her, they take us too, and we will have earned it. But I am not going to send a child out that door alone to be judged. Not by them and not by us, so we walked her out. Onto the ice, into the cold, the three of us and a limping child with a malformed leg toward 41 apex predators who had every right by 4,000 years of law to close on us and finish what we had stolen. And I went unarmed, on purpose, because Reyes was right that this was the moment that decided everything, and because I had finally understood that the most powerful thing the Bellwether had brought to that world was not in any of its gun batteries. The child let go of Aweni's hand at the halfway point. She let go and she went on alone, the dragging step, slow over the snow, and we stopped where we were and let her go, because there was nothing else honest to do. The 41 Scarn rose. They came up off the ice onto their full height, all of them, and they were a wall of them, tall and forward-leaning and terrible, and the child walked toward them on her ruined leg, calling the three notes, and they did not move to her, and they did not move away. Corrado came forward to meet her. He crossed the distance and stopped in front of her and lowered himself down, slow, onto four limbs, until his long, scarred head was level with hers, and the two of them stood there in the snow, the first blade of the finishing pack, and the child he had spent half a day running to her death, and he did the gesture for finishing, the slow closing of the claws. Right there, in front of her, in front of us, in front of his whole pack. He raised his forelimb and he closed the claws, and then he stopped. He held the closed claws a moment, trembling. I could see it through the long lens, the tremor in that forelimb, and then he opened them. He opened his claws slowly and he laid the open hand, flat and empty, against the child's chest over her heart, the exact gesture Aweni had made to him on the 6th day, the refusal, the on-purpose refusal, the thing that no animal can do. He was telling her, I understand what our law asks, and I am refusing it, and it costs me and I am doing it on purpose. The Scarn had a law 4,000 years deep that said a child who cannot run must be finished by her kin. And the first blade of the finishing pack stood on the ice in front of his whole people and broke it, with his open hand on a child's heart, because three soft unarmed strangers had shown him that there was another way to love something that could not be saved, that you could carry the harder thing, the keeping, the slow ruined life, the child who limps and lives, and that carrying it was not weakness. It was the heaviest strength his world had ever been asked to hold. That was the first contact, not the ship, not the fire, not the floods and the noise and the gunship that came down screaming. The first thing the Scarn ever learned about humanity, the thing that went into their history and changed the shape of their world, was that we would stand on a stranger's ground, unarmed, and refuse to let a child die, and pay for the refusal in our own grief in the open, where they could see it cost us. They had thought strength was the closing of the claws. We showed them it could be the opening. Corrado lifted the child. He carried her back to the pack, and the pack folded around her, and they did not finish her. They took her up the ridge alive, with her ruined leg, into a world that had never before made room for a child who could not run, and by doing it they remade what their world was. We did not stay to see what they built. That was not ours to see. Reyes brought the Bellwether up off the ice on the 9th day, on a weld I will never fully trust, and we climbed out through the storm into the dark, and behind us on the ridge 41 Scarn stood and watched us go, and the smallest of them, the one who limped, raised a forelimb, claws spread, turned outward. The open hand, she had learned it from us, she gave it back. But I told you this was a piece bought at a cost, and I have not paid the whole bill yet, so let me start paying it, because the story is a lie without it. Corporal Lund lost the arm. The forearm Aweni laid open in the corridor when the three Scarn came over the lock had gone hot by the time we climbed out of the atmosphere, and it kept going hot all the long run home, 6 weeks from any real surgeon, and Aweni saved his life and she could not save the arm. He came home a one-armed man at 26. That is one part of the cost, and it was not the last of it, and I will get to the rest. But first I have to tell you about the run home, and what we were carrying, and what was waiting for us when we made orbit and broke the silence and told the Confederation what we had done. The run home was 6 weeks, and they were the strangest 6 weeks of my service, because we were carrying a thing none of us knew how to hold. The first night out of the atmosphere, before the silence of the long run had even settled over us, the Scarn did one last thing that none of us were ready for. As the Bellwether climbed and the canyon fell away beneath us, and the ridge with its 41 figures shrank to nothing on the thermal, Every one of them rose. We saw it on the aft camera, the whole pack coming up off the snow at once. And for a bad moment, Pell thought it was a final lunge, a last refusal. It was not. They rose and they raised their forelimbs, all of them, claws spread and turned outward. 41 open hands lifted toward a black ship, climbing into a sky that had never before given them anything but weather. They held it until we were out of sight. I have stood in a great many farewells in a long life, and I have never seen one to match it. An entire pack of apex predators, the most patient hunters their world ever made, standing in the snow with their hunting claws turned harmlessly to the sky, telling a departing gunship the one word we had taught them, and they had taught us back, not goodbye. The Skarn have no word for goodbye. Their whole culture is the long chase that does not stop. The open hand does not mean farewell. It means I will not close on you. It means you are safe from me. They held 41 open hands to the sky until the ship that had stolen and then saved their child was gone. And then, Pell told me later, they turned as one and went back to the ridge, to the child, to the work of becoming whatever a people becomes after the sky opens its hand. We had no protocol for what we had done. There is a binder. There was in those days for First Contact, and it ran 400 pages, and not one of those pages described a gunship crew that had landed in the middle of a sacred rite, sheltered a child, and walked away 9 days later with a piece it could not name and a corporal short an arm. The binder assumed First Contact would be deliberate, planned, conducted by trained envoys with linguists and xenopsychologists and a chain of approval that went all the way to the Confederation Council. What we had was a doctor, an ops chief, a captain who would not run, and 3 notes hummed by a dying child. We argued on the way home about what to write. Dash wanted the report to be precise and clinical and to make no claims it could not defend, because he knew there would be a board, and he was protecting Reyes the only way a good XO knows how, by giving the board nothing to hang her with that wasn't already true. Oweni wanted the report to tell the truth about the Skarn, about finishing, about Corrado, about the open hand, because she had spent 9 days learning a people and she could not bear to see them reduced to a line item in an incident summary. Reyes listened to both of them and then she wrote it herself, and what she wrote was the truth, all of it, including the parts that hurt her. She wrote that she had broken doctrine. She wrote that she would do it again. She did not ask for a medal, and she did not ask for forgiveness. She asked only that the Confederation send a real envoy with real linguists to continue what we had stumbled into, because there was a sapient people back there who had just, on the strength of 9 days with a tired gunship crew, begun to remake the deepest law of their world, and they deserved better than to be left alone with that. I read the report over her shoulder when she filed it, and there was one line in it I have never forgotten. She wrote, "We did not give them anything they did not already have. We showed them a use for it they had not yet found." I have thought about that line for 30 years. I think it is the truest thing anyone has ever written about what First Contact actually is. We did not bring the Skarn mercy. The mercy was already in them. It was in the way they would not abandon a child who could not run, in the way they ran the long chase out of love and not cruelty, in the agony of the finishing itself, which was a thing they did because they could not bear to do nothing. The capacity was all there. What they had never seen was a people who took that same capacity and pointed it at keeping instead of finishing. We did not teach them to love their children. They already loved their children more fiercely than we knew how to. We showed them that love did not have to end in the closing of a claw. The child's name by the end of the contact had changed. The Skarn had called her Issa too, the one who was being finished. In the histories they brought us, generations later, she has a different name. They call her Issa Ven. The package renders it as the one who was kept. She lived a long time by Skarn measure. She never ran well. She limped her whole life. And she became, on that world, something their language had not previously had a word for. A keeper of younglings who could not run, the first of a line of them, the founder of a thing that did not exist before the Sky Temple came down and now exists across the whole Skarn world. Children who cannot run are brought to the keepers now. They are not finished. They limp and they live, and many of them grow up to be keepers in their turn, and the whole institution traces itself back to a malformed child who was supposed to die in a canyon and instead was carried across a stranger's threshold by a doctor with empty hands. I did not know any of that on the run home. On the run home, I knew only that we had done something irreversible, and that I did not know whether it was the best or the worst thing I had ever been part of, and that I could not stop hearing the 3 notes. Pell could not stop hearing them either. She had recorded them, the lost call, and she would play it sometimes in the small hours of the watch, low, and we would all sit in the well and not say anything, 6 weeks of us, carrying a thing we could not name back toward a home that was going to put it on trial. The Board of Inquiry took 4 months. They convened it on Thessaly Station in a gray room with a long table, and they called every one of us in turn, and they asked the questions a board is supposed to ask, and most of them were fair. Had Commander Reyes been authorized to land on a no-contact world? No. Had she initiated unauthorized contact with a sapient species? Yes. Had that contact resulted in casualties? Yes, 1 crewman maimed, 3 aliens wounded in a boarding attempt repelled. Had the contact bound the Confederation to obligations it had not consented to? That one they argued about for a week. I testified for 2 days. They were not unkind to me, but they were thorough. And at one point a board member, a thin man named Corcoran, Intelligence Directorate, the kind of man who has never been 6 weeks from home in his life, asked me whether, in my professional judgment as ops chief, the Bellwether could have climbed to orbit and logged the event without intervening. And I had to answer honestly, because that is what you do under oath, and I said yes. We could have. The cowling would probably have held to orbit. The child would have died, and we would have come home clean, and there would have been no board and no contact and no peace and no keepers. Corcoran wrote that down. And then he asked me the question that the whole inquiry was really about, the question underneath all the others. She asked Chief Orson, given the risk, to your ship, to your crew, to 2 centuries of contact doctrine, do you believe Commander Reyes made the right decision? And I want to tell you that I gave some ringing speech, some defense of mercy that left the room silent. I did not. I am not that kind of man, and it was not that kind of room. I sat there for a long moment, and I thought about the 5th day, when I had been the one who wanted to give the child back, and I thought about Reyes saying, you don't get to put a person down, because the weight of them turned out to be real, and I said, I don't know if it was the right decision, sir. I know it was the human one. And I've come to believe those are not always the same thing, but I'd rather serve under an officer who'll choose the second one when she has to, and answer for it after, than one who'll always choose the first and sleep fine. That's all I've got. Corcoran wrote that down too. There was one more exchange in that gray room that I have never repeated, and I will repeat it now because it is the truest thing the inquiry produced, and it never made the record. Late on the 2nd day, a board member I did not know, a woman older who had said almost nothing for 2 days, asked me a question that was not on any list. She asked what the child's name meant. The scar named Issa, and I told her the one who was being finished. A name and a sentence at once. The room went quiet. And then she asked the second question, the one I have carried out of that room for 60 years, and her voice was not a board member's voice when she asked it. She asked, and what do they call her now, Chief? And I said, Isaven, the one who was kept. The old woman looked at me for a long moment, and then she looked down at her papers, and she did not write anything. And I understood that she had just decided how she was going to vote, and that no testimony about doctrine had moved her, and no argument about authority had moved her, and that what had moved her was the distance between 2 words in a language she would never speak. The distance between a child who was being finished and a child who was kept, and the 9 days and the maimed corporal and the gunship on the ice that lay in the space between them. Corcoran started to ask me something else. The old woman said, I think we have what we need from the chief. And that was the end of my testimony, and I never learned her name, and I have always believed she was the vote that saved Reyes from a court martial. I hope she knew what she did. I hope someone, somewhere, told her what the Scarn became, so that she could know the vote she cast on the strength of 2 words went out into the dark and built a civilization of keepers. I will never know. The board keeps its files closed, the way the galaxy keeps all its files, for exactly long enough to forget the only thing in them that mattered. They did not court-martial Reyes. They came close. The vote, we heard later, was split, and what tipped it was not Oweni's testimony about the Scarn moving as it was, and not Reyes' own refusal to apologize, which several board members found insubordinate. What tipped it was a transmission. 11 weeks into the inquiry, a long-range relay picked up a signal from the direction of Center's Reach. Faint, repeating, structured. It took the cryptographers a month to confirm it was not natural. It was the 3 notes, the lost call, broadcast on a tight radio band that a pre-spaceflight species should not have been able to generate, aimed, as near as anyone could tell, at the patch of sky we had climbed into. The Scarn had reverse-engineered a radio from the wreckage of nothing, from watching our hull, from the resonator noise, from 4,000 years of being the most patient hunters their world had ever produced. And they had built it to send us one message. And the message was the lost call, the child's call, sent out into the dark over and over, to the people who had answered it once. You do not court-martial the captain who started that. They retired Reyes instead. Honorably, quietly, with a commendation that did not use the word she deserved, and they assigned a real envoy to Center's Reach, with linguists and xenopsychologists and a chain of approval all the way to the council, exactly as she had asked, and the formal relationship between the Confederation and the Skarn began the day that Envoy made orbit. The histories date the first contact to that day, the official one, the one with the credentials and the protocol. They are wrong, and the Skarn know they are wrong, and every Skarn child who is brought to a keeper instead of a finishing knows they are wrong. The first contact was a black gunship coming down, screaming on its lift drives to put 150 meters of hull between a child and her death and a doctor with empty hands and a captain who would not run. I left the service 4 years after the board, so did Oweni, so did Pell. We did not coordinate it. It just happened. The way a crew that has been through a thing together drifts apart once the thing is done and there is nothing left to hold them but the memory of it. Reyes was already gone, retired to a coastal town on a quiet world where she kept a boat and answered no letters. Dash made captain and got his own command and was, by every account, a fine and cautious officer who never once in his career broke a doctrine. And I have always believed that the 9 days in the canyon were the reason, that he had seen what it cost to be right by breaking the rules, and he had decided, honestly and not unwisely, that he would rather be the kind of officer who never had to make that choice. The galaxy needs both kinds. I have come to believe that. It needs the Reyes who will land in the canyon, and it needs the Dash who will spend his whole life making sure no one ever has to. I went into salvage. There is a symmetry to it I did not choose and have never been able to ignore. The Skarn had filed us that first day in the only category their law had for a thing that takes, and I spent the rest of my working life taking dead ships apart for what could be saved out of them, and every time I cut a hull open I thought, for just a second, about a black slab coming down on its lift drives to put itself between a child and the cold. The Skarn came up off their world 60 years after we left it. I was an old man by then. Most of the crew was gone. Oweni had died, Pell had died, Lund had died, the one-armed corporal in his bed at last, an old man too. On a farm he had no business being able to run with one arm and ran anyway out of pure stubbornness. Reyes was the only one of us left besides me, and she was very old, and she still answered no letters. I knew the Skarn were coming because everyone knew. It was the news of that decade, a new species making the jump to the stars, a first contact people who had had their first contact long ago in a way the official record could never quite explain. The Confederation sent a delegation to meet them at the edge of their system. The delegation was full of envoys and linguists and council members and protocol. The Skarn asked for 2 people by name. The records of those 9 days had gone with their histories up through 60 years of their development, copied and recopied, taught to younglings, carved, I am told, into the wall of the place where the keepers train. They asked for the doctor with the empty hands, and they were told, gently, that she had been dead for 19 years. And they asked for the captain who would not run, and they were told she was alive, very old, on a quiet coastal world, and that she answered no letters. A Skarn ship, and they build beautiful ships now, long and low and forward-leaning, the whole silhouette of them shaped like a thing made for the patient chase. A Skarn ship broke off from the delegation, without permission, exactly the way a gunship had once broken off from its survey, and it went to the quiet coastal world, and it landed on the beach below Reyes's house. I was not there. I have only the account which came to me second-hand and then third-hand, and which I have assembled as best I can. But I am told that an old woman walked down from her house to the beach, slow, with a cane, and that the thing that came down the ramp of the Skarn ship to meet her was a Skarn of the keeper caste. They have a caste of keepers now, where once they had only the finishing, and that this keeper was very old too, by Skarn measure, and that she walked with a dragging gait. One limb malformed, a limb that had never run right. It was the child, Isabin, the one who was kept. She had lived all those years, the founder of the keepers, and when her people made the jump to the stars and learned that the doctor was dead, she had come herself, an old crippled keeper who should never have been able to make the journey, to find the captain who would not run, because she was the last living thing on either side who remembered the canyon from inside it. The 2 old women, I cannot call them anything else, though one of them was a Skarn keeper and one was a retired human captain. The 2 old women stood on the beach, and Reyes, who had answered no letters for 60 years, who had never once in all that time spoken publicly about the canyon, who had carried the board's failure to call it a triumph as a private weight she would not set down. Reyes looked at the limping keeper coming down the ramp, and she knew her. Across 60 years and a whole species worth of change, she knew her, and Isaven raised one long forelimb, claws spread, turned outward, the open hand. And the old captain raised her empty hand back. They sat on the beach for a long time, I am told, the 2 of them, and they could not speak each other's languages. The keeper had a little human speech, and Reyes had a little Skarn, And between them, they had perhaps enough to ask after the dead and to fail to say the rest. So mostly they did not speak. They sat and watched the sea, an old human and an old hunter who had been a dying child, and at some point Isaven made a sound. 3 notes. The lost call. The thing she had made on the deck of our medical base 60 years before, the thing Pell had recorded and played in the small hours, the thing the Skarn had built a radio out of wreckage to broadcast into the dark, and Reyes, who is not a woman who weeps, wept. I have thought a long time about why that sound. Why, of everything in 2 languages, the keeper chose the lost call to give the captain at the end. And I think it is this. The lost call is what a Skarn youngling makes when it is alone and hurt and wants its pack to know where it is. It is a child saying, "Here I am. Come find me. I am lost." And what Isaven was telling Reyes in the only words that crossed both their worlds was that she had made that call once, in the cold, at the end of everything, and that someone had answered it. That across all the dark of all those years, the call had been answered. That she had been lost, and a temple of fire had come down out of the sky and found her, and she had lived, and she had spent the long life she was never supposed to have, making sure that no Skarn child who made that call into the cold would ever again go unanswered. The keepers, I told you, do not finish the children who cannot run, but that is the small version of it. The large version is that the Skarn, who were once a people organized top to bottom around the act of running prey to ground, who built their law and their faith and their kinship around the finishing. The Skarn became, over 60 years, a people who answer the lost call. It is the center of them now, the way the finishing was the center of them before. They go out into the dark for the lost ones. They built ships for it. The first thing they did with the stars was not conquest and not trade, it was rescue. They have crossed into 3 other systems now, the Skarn, and in each one, the first thing they have done is listen for a call in the cold and go toward it. They learned that from a black gunship and a doctor with empty hands and a captain who would not run, and they have done more with it than we ever did. We taught them not to put a person down because the weight of them turned out to be real, and they took that lesson out into the galaxy and made it the whole purpose of a civilization, while we went back to our salvage and our doctrines and our quiet coastal worlds. That is the part the Board of Inquiry could never have weighed, because it had not happened yet, and would not happen for 60 years, and could not be quantified even then. They asked whether doctrine had been broken. The answer was yes. They could not ask the only question that mattered, which was, what does a species become when the first thing it ever learns about you is that you will refuse, at cost, unarmed, on its own ground, to let a child die? They could not ask it because the answer takes 60 years to arrive, and a board has 4 months, and the galaxy keeps no file long enough to hold the whole of what a single decision in a single canyon can set in motion. But the Skarn keep that file. They carved it into the wall where the keepers train, the Sky Temple. The first blade who opened his hand, the child who could not run and lived anyway, the doctor with the empty hands, and the captain who would not run, which means something different in their language than it does in ours. Because to a people built on the chase, the one who will not run is the strongest thing there is. And they did not mean she would not flee. They meant she would not abandon. The captain who would not abandon. That is what they call her, on the wall, in the place where they teach the young keepers how to go out into the cold and answer the call. I have not finished paying the bill, and I promised you I would, so here is the rest of it, because a piece bought at a cost is not a piece at all if you only ever talk about what it bought and never about what it took. It took Lund's arm, I have said that. It took more than the arm, in the end. It took the easy years a young man is owed, the ones where the body does what you ask without argument, and he spent his instead learning to do everything over again with one hand. And he never once, in all the times I saw him after, said it was not worth it. I think he was protecting us when he said that. I think a one-armed man who tells the people who were in the corridor with him that it was worth it is doing for them the same thing a Wenny did on the ice, carrying the harder thing out loud so the rest of us would not have to carry it alone. I never thanked him for it properly. He is dead now and the chance is gone, and that is a small private bill I will pay until I die. It took Reyes's career, and worse than her career, it took the thing a good officer wants more than rank, which is to be told by the service she gave her life to that she did right. They never told her that. They retired her with a commendation that danced around the word. They let the official record date the contact to the envoy's arrival, and Reyes carried for 60 years the knowledge that the thing she was proudest of in her whole life was filed, in her own service's archive, as a doctrine violation that was generously not prosecuted. The Skarn gave her on a beach what her own people never did. I have made my peace with a great many things from those 9 days, but I have never made my peace with that, and I do not intend to. Some bills should stay unpaid in the open where everyone can see them. It keeps you honest about what the right thing actually costs. And it took something from me that I have never been able to name precisely, except to say that I went into that canyon a man who believed the universe was a place where you logged the thing and climbed, where the rules were the accumulated wisdom people smarter and more careful than you, where the disciplined choice and the right choice were the same choice and the only failure was nerve. I came out of it knowing that is not true. I came out of it knowing that sometimes the disciplined choice is to watch a child die through a thermal scope and call it doctrine, and that there are people who can do that and live, and that I am not one of them, and that the not being one of them is the only thing about myself I have ever been entirely sure was good. That sounds like a gift. It is not a gift. It is a weight. Once you know that the rules will sometimes ask you to do an unforgivable thing and call it prudence, you can never again hide inside the rules, and you spend the rest of your life knowing that the next canyon might be yours, and that you will have to choose, and that no binder will choose for you. That is what first contact cost us: an arm, a career, a service's honesty, and the comfort of believing the rules would always be enough. We paid it, all of us, in different currencies, and we would pay it again. I want that understood. Not one of us, asked at the end, would have climbed and logged it. Reyes told the board she would do it again, and they wrote it down as if it were a confession. It was not a confession. It was the only thing she had left that she was certain of. I am very old now. I am the last of the Bellwether's bridge crew. Reyes went the year after the keeper came to her beach, and I have always believed, though I cannot prove it, that she was waiting for that she had held on through 60 years of unanswered letters and unspoken wait for the chance to raise her empty hand to a child she had carried out of the cold, and that once she had done it, was nothing left she needed to stay for. I think the keeper gave her permission to set the weight down at last. I think the lost call answered was the thing that finally let her rest. I hope it was. I have spent a great deal of my old age hoping it was. The scarns still come. There is a keeper ship in our system more often than not these days. They have made it a kind of pilgrimage, the young keepers, to come and stand on the ice of the world where it happened, the canyon, which they have left exactly as it was, the way we would leave a battlefield. They go out into the dark, and they answer the lost call in 3 systems and counting, and between the rescues they come here, to the place where a black gunship came down screaming and put itself between a child and her death, and they stand in the canyon where 41 hunters lay down in the snow and mourned, and they remember what their people were before and what one decision in 9 days made them. I went there once. An old salvager has the means eventually to buy passage anywhere, and I bought passage to that world before my body refused the trip entirely, and I stood in the canyon. It is just a canyon, snow and ice and a wall of dark rock, and the wind comes down it the way it came down at the night we landed, and there is nothing there to mark what happened, because the scarn do not mark it with stone. They mark it by going out into the cold for the lost. That is the only monument they would build, and it is the only one that matters. And it is the largest monument any decision of mine was ever part of, and I had almost no part in it at all. I patched a cowling I wanted on the 5th day to give the child back. I am in the histories as a footnote, the ops chief, the one who climbed out onto the hull, and that is more than I earned. Young people ask me, when they learn I was aboard the Bellwether, whether I was afraid in the canyon. They expect a story about the predators, about the night the 3 of them came over the lock, about 41 hunters lying in the snow. And I tell them, yes, I was afraid of all of that. The ordinary fear of a body that does not want to be torn open. But the fear I remember is a different one, and it is the one I think is worth passing on. I was afraid the whole 9 days that we were going to get it wrong, that we would mean a kindness and deliver a horror, the way we nearly did on the 2nd day with the lost call, and that a child and 41 mourners and a whole world's idea of itself would be paid as the price of our good intentions. That is the fear that should keep a species honest at first contact, not the fear of being killed. The fear of doing harm in a language you have not yet learned to speak. We are a people who reach out. It is the best thing about us and the most dangerous, and the two cannot be separated. And the canyon taught me that the reaching is only worth what it costs us to do it slowly, carefully, with our certainty set down where the other party can see we have set it down. The scarn forgave us the lost call. I have never been sure we deserved to be forgiven it. I have only been sure that we were, and that the forgiveness was the beginning of everything that came after. But I was there. I saw the wall come down out of the sky, and I saw the doctor cross the ice with empty hands, and I saw the first blade open his claws over a child's heart, and I have spent a long life trying to understand the one thing that was true under all of it, the thing the scarn understood faster than we did, the thing the board could not weigh and the histories could not quite say. It is this: the galaxy spends a great deal of time learning what a species can destroy. The size of its fleets, the reach of its guns, the worlds it can burn. It is a sensible thing to learn. I have no quarrel with it. But it is not the first thing the Skarn learned about us, and it is not the thing that changed them. And after a long life of taking dead warships apart for scrap, I have come to believe it is not even the most important thing there is to know about a people. The most important thing is what they will not put down, what they will carry, at cost, unarmed on a stranger's ground, when every law and every reason and every disciplined voice tells them to set it down and climb. That is the true measure of a people, and the Skarn took ours on the worst night of a small child's life, and they found it heavier than our guns. We came down out of the sky to do a small, mean, surgical thing, to put a hull between a child and the cold for an hour. We left behind a world that goes out into the dark to answer the lost. I do not know that we deserve to be the people who did that. I know only that we did it, badly, frightened, arguing with ourselves the whole way, and that it held. And that 60 years later, an old crippled keeper crossed the galaxy to make 3 notes on a beach for the captain, who would not run. She raised her empty hand. The captain raised hers. And somewhere out in the cold where the lost are calling, a Skarn ship is turning toward the sound right now. Because a long time ago, on the floor of a canyon, a tired crew refused to let one child go, and the galaxy has been answering that refusal ever since.